Good morning, it's day 8 of the confidence series. I just thought I'd show you, it's a little bit wild and woolly out there this morning. So I'm going to move over here a little bit where it's less windy and less noisy so you can hear me a little bit better. Let's make sure I don't fall over. Before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to let everybody know we had some technical difficulties yesterday with the Facebook video download. We were talking about selection, and I think it might have actually been a bit of natural selection because only Facebook videos worked. All the other platforms we had to put up an audio version. So apologise for that. If that was one of you're watching on YouTube or Insta, maybe the video wasn't as good quality as we would like to have had. So hopefully today is a little bit better. I wanted to bring you a different aspect. As I say, the surf's a little bit wild and woolly. What we're going to talk about today is team dynamics and internal conflict. The reason I entered this as one of our topics is because it's often discussed predominantly by the coaching staff, although it's actually the athletes that can seriously struggle with the team dynamic, particularly when we're looking at young athletes. So what do we mean by team dynamic? Because ultimately, the vast majority of the people that you train with, if you're an athlete, you also compete against. So you're in an environment where we're trying to teach you and grow and nurture and build trust. Yet the people that you're in your team with are exactly the same, after exactly the same outcome as you. They even may be after the same position or selection. So being an athlete in an environment that's highly competitive is counterintuitive, but also it's a day-to-day occurrence. So we want to look at it from two different aspects. The first aspect we kind of touched on yesterday when we were talking about a coach and an athlete dynamic. We wanted that symbiotic relationship. We wanted the coach to understand that there's things that the coach needs to do to create that, this is what I need from you, what do you need from me dynamic. It's very hard for a coach when he's got a competitive or she's got a competitive environment where the athlete's looking to compete, they all want the same amount of attention, they probably need different things from the coach. But it's super important as a coach that what we do, we focus on individual athletes. What does that athlete need to be the best version of them? What does that team need to look like in order for it to work, be efficient and be effective? There's also a little bit of a dynamic shift between groups that are male orientated and groups that are female orientated. The hierarchy in a male dominated team is different to the hierarchy in a female dominated team. And as a coach, that's an important aspect to be ultra aware of. I know coaches that work with both the female and the male teams and often come back to me and say, Dave, I don't understand, it worked with one group but it's not working with another. And that's often because females and males learn differently, of course. And also that when you look at the dynamic of a male group, it's very singular in thought process. When you look at the female group, it's very dynamic, it's driven by the team, by the group. So I won't get into the nuts and bolts of the differences in this conversation, but just be aware that when you're building a team, particularly as a coach, you've got to understand the dynamics of that team. Otherwise, you will end up with significant amount of conflict. So let's look at it from an athlete's perspective now. Bruce Tuckman, created the group dynamic philosophy. And what that does is it looks at the way that a group comes together, how that group is formed, how that group ends up being normalized before it can perform. So the forming, storming, norming and performing cycle every group goes through. This is not a athlete-centric psychology, this is a human psychology. So whether you're talking about what happens in the office, whether you're talking about what happens in school, even in relationships, that forming, storming, norming and performing cycle we have to go through. So what does it actually mean? Well, when you're forming, that's literally what it says. It's how that group comes together. And what you initially see is a peak in performance, because everybody's doing as they're told, everybody's turning up, everybody's trying their hardest, and nobody's really ruffling any kind of feathers. So that dynamic can be a false positive when you first put a team together. So as a coach, that can be very frustrating, because you've put this team together, you think they're working really, really well, and all of a sudden it falls into the storming phase. Now, the storming phase is designed specifically for that group to work out, how do we operate? Who does what? Who's the great communicator? Who's the pacifier? Who's the decision maker? Who's the one that's the agitator? And every group will have different people who fit different dynamics socially, but also from a performance perspective. Most teams, we put a leadership group together. This forming, storming, norming and performing, and the dynamics of hierarchy are super important when you're building a leadership group. But let's go back to the forming and storming for a second. If we know that we form this group, then all of a sudden what they do is they'll drop in performance, off the cliff kind of drop. And there's conflict in the group. All of a sudden they're not getting on as well as they used to. They're not gelling the way they used to. And the key thing for an outsider, that's us as coaches or parents, will see is the communication will shift. When that communication shifts, you know it's gone into that storming phase. Now, sometimes what a coach will try and do is take back control and say, no, we're not going to storm. You're going to do as you're told. You're going to perform this way. You're going to interact this way. This is how our training and our competitions go. That is a dictatorship. And what tends to happen is underground, that storming is still going to happen, because we're human, and all humans, being pack animals, need to know exactly where we fit in that group. So how do we get past storming and get to norming? Recognizing that what norming is really is a normal operating system that's optimized. Well, we've got to work out who's who in the zoo. Who does what? What's their role? what do they bring to the table? What makes them uniquely them? And as coaching staff and as parents, we've got to feed that. We've got to recognize that. We've got to cultivate that within our team. So why is that important? If we're talking about a low-level team, so maybe a real junior grassroots team, it's probably not as significant to worry about that. Although, if you're going to optimize the outcome for the athletes, I definitely suggest you understand that dynamic of forming, storming and norming. But when we're talking about high performance and elite athletes, every 1% matters. So if they're coming to training and they're not optimized, if their focus is on that the team isn't working, they don't want to be there, there's a lot of conflict going on, then they're not optimizing their training, they're certainly not trusting what they're doing, and you as a coach will probably be repeating your messages time and time again. So it's never an optimal, it's definitely a suboptimal world to operate in when you've got this internal conflict that's going on. So what we want to be able to do is recognize instantly that we start to move into that storming phase and get the team to communicate. If there's a leadership group, get them to initiate. If there's no leadership group, then maybe that's part and parcel of the problem. There's a lot of different strategies we can do to create normalization, to get the athletes to a point where they truly understand how they optimize their environment. Our environment has a massive impact on our ability to trust, our ability to process, and our ability to operate. So when we started this conversation 8 days ago, we talked about athletes who struggle to perform. And then we talked about inconsistency in performance. Our dynamic, our environment has a lot to do with that. And that can come from this forming, storming, and normalizing process. So if we go forming, storming, norming, the last part of that is performing. And what we need to recognize is an athlete can never get to performing when they're not norming, because it always stays in their prefrontal cortex. It always still, the boss is trying to solve the problems. As parents, we can be contributors to this challenge too. More often than not, I'll see parents who will try and orchestrate social events with their kids outside of training in an effort to try and build team and build bonding. If you're an elite athlete and you're spending a lot of your time working and training and competing with the same people, then you're asked to socialize with them. That can be quite tough. I was a very, let's say, not particularly social gymnast. I was a bit of an introvert. I liked my own company. I liked to train as much as I possibly could on my own. And when the parents got together and they tried to initiate some kind of social bonding between us, because we were highly competitive. We came from a very successful team and we were constantly competing for the same positions on our national team. So the parents tried to get involved and orchestrate that. It just created way more conflict inside the team. So parents, as a parent myself, let them alone. Let them try and work through this process themselves. Let them try and understand how they get to normalization. So understanding team dynamics, whether that be the forming, storming, norming, performing, whether that be the hierarchy dynamic, whether that be the relationship of symbiotic communication between a coach and an athlete, these have to be worked through in order for it to be optimized. Sometimes it will change frequently due to injury, due to team selection, particularly if you're on a national team and you train at one club and then all of a sudden you're put together for an international competition. That forming, storming, norming and performing still has to happen. As you can tell, this is probably a really big, chunky topic, and to be honest with you, I've only scratched the surface when we're talking about team dynamics and confidence in performance. But it should give you a really good indication of where you and your team and your dynamic is right now. Hope that's helped you understand your team dynamics. Tomorrow, our last full session, we're going to talk about motivation. We're going to understand how to self-motivate, how to motivate people around you, how to motivate your students and your kids if they're the athletes. So that's going to be a big topic for us to cover on the last full session. And then on last day, day 10, I'm going to answer as many of the questions we've had come through. And we've had so many questions. So that's great. At least a lot of you people are super interested in mental performance and becoming confident performers. On that, we still got spaces on the 19th of February, both in the morning session and the evening session, for you to register to our confidence workshop. It's free, it's online, and the only way to get a recording is to sign up and register. So I've hoped you've enjoyed today's. I've gone over my 10 minutes, which I try to do most days. Hope you got a lot from it. Any comments, any questions, make sure you put them in the comments below. Contact us directly and we'll answer those. I'm going to try and get back in the water and make sure that I can swim back to the shore. Have a great day. I'll speak to you same time tomorrow.